meeting of the Planning Commission to order. One quick announcement, item number 4 has been postponed, so that was the State Street zoning map and master plan amendment. So if anybody's here for that, we're not going to do it tonight. You can go home and have dinner. Okay, start with the report of the chair. I have nothing to report. Vice Chair?
I have nothing to report either.
And the director.
Thank you. Just to give everybody an update on activities at the City Council. Yesterday they had 2 briefings. One was about the zoning amendment along North Temple and about 2100 west that would modify the airport overlay to accommodate an affordable or a supportive housing development. It sounds and it didn't seem like there's any controversy or concerns with that. So that's scheduled for public hearing and decision over the next 30 days, I think. So I'd anticipate that to pass based on the briefing. They also had a briefing on the ADU proposal. And the council took a number of straw polls on some of the issues or changes that the Planning Commission recommended. So the straw poll one, the important one, I think, for this is that they all agreed to remove the conditional use process for that. They kept the increase in square footage up to 1,000. They did remove the increase for lots over 12,000. So it's just 1,000 regardless of your lot size. And then they kept most of the exceptions to parking. So there were like 4 or 5 ways. Basically it says you need to provide 1 stall for the ADU unless you're one of these things, close to transit, bike lanes, etc. So they kept most of those in. They took out, I think they took out the on-street space and kept the others. So they also held a public hearing last night, and it was contrary to the past public hearings that the council's had on ADUs. It was actually most of the people who spoke were in support. The other straw poll that they asked to take was to whether or not to remove the owner occupancy requirement, and they chose to leave that in for now. So the public hearing was actually, I think, fairly cordial, as far as not as heated as they've been in the past, and there were actually a majority of speakers, at least who provided verbal comments, were in favor for the most part. And a number of people did ask to remove that owner occupancy requirement. So we'll see what the council does. Again, it's scheduled for decision at one of the upcoming meetings, so we'll see that pretty quick. And I think that is all I had.
Thank you, Nick. Now we have our little time for the Planning Commission to have any discussion or bring up any issues that any of the members think should be brought to our attention. Does anybody have anything they're concerned about? Okay.
I guess I actually do. You know what? No. I don't.
Okay. Sometimes you can answer your own question. But bring it up some other time. It's okay. Okay, now we'll move to the consent agenda. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4 items on that, 2 time extension requests, and the approval of the retreat minutes for January 18th, and the approval of the minutes for January 25th. Do I have a motion to approve those or any discussion?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a Motion by Commissioner Shear and a second by Commissioner Christensen. Commissioner Barry? Barry?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Burrows?
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen?
Yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira?
Yes.
Commissioner Paredes?
I'll vote yes.
Commissioner Shear?
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle?
Yes.
Commissioner Lee?
Yes.
Commissioner Gent?
Abstain as I was not present for the retreat.
Thank you. And Commissioner Gale? Like, jump right in there, it's the minutes.
Yes.
And the chair will also, well, I can vote, I'll vote yes on it. Okay, now we'll move on to the regular portion of the agenda, the public hearing portion. Our first item up is a zoning text amendment related to pole signs on school properties, case number PLN PCM 2021-00190. Welcome, Megan.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Okay, good, it's working.
You got to get really close to that mic.
I will. Not a problem. All right, this is a zoning text amendment related to pole signs on school property. The applicant is Paul Schultz. He's with the Salt Lake City School District. The request is to amend the sign ordinance to allow freestanding pole signs on school premises. Currently, pole signs are not permitted in the zones where the schools are located. The proposed amendment would allow pole signs on school property, and staff is in support of the recommendation with a few modifications, and I'll go over those. The impact will be public and private schools citywide. The Planning Commission's role in the application is to provide a recommendation to the City Council, who will make the final decision regarding the requested zoning text amendment. So to start out, I wanted to show a couple pictures of the existing conditions. There are currently 10 pole signs on school properties within the Salt Lake City School District. Here is examples of a few that exist now. This is the applicant's revised proposed text, and originally they submitted text to the Planning Division, and I worked with them because their suggestions was, there were two. The suggestion was to recommend allowing the pole signs by zone, PL or PL2. The problem with that is that there are many parcels for school properties, and some of those properties are not consolidated, or the parcels are not consolidated. And there's also schools that are on more than 2 acres and less than 2 acres in the city. So after working with them, this is their proposed text that is included as in I believe, the first page of the staff report. So I wanted to go over the summary of the proposed text and the summary of our modifications. Staff does recommend that pole signs used for K through 12 public school and private school, based on the definition in the code, are allowed, provided they comply with the following requirements: maximum number of signs, maximum height, minimum setback, which is set at 0, as long as it's not overhanging into the public right-of-way. The total combined sign face areas, no off-premise advertising allowed. They must meet the general standards for construction and all applicable zoning overlay requirements. So, for example, in the historic districts. Permit and fees would be required. There would only be allowed to be 1 pole sign on each school property. Each pole sign would be allowed to have a minimum of 3 sign faces. The height that we are suggesting as staff is 15 feet on a local street. This will minimize the impact to neighborhoods. And then 25 feet on a collector or arterial street. In the staff report, I included a table that has the heights and the areas for signs in our commercial districts. This suggestion is similar to what is in that table. The maximum combined sign face area, the combined area of all the sign faces would be 180 square feet on a local street. For a collector or arterial, 540 square feet. And I already talked about the setback requirements. So staff's recommended text is in your staff report. I have gone through our modifications. And what does this look like? I think that's a big question. And here are 3 signs at high schools, at East High, Highland High, and then West. And on an arterial collector street, the visual impact, I use the arrows to kind of show what does that actually look like. So this gives you an idea how that would translate in real time. The key considerations for this proposal is a public process. Planning staff attended the Sugar House Community Council meeting. The applicant also was there. We did notify, we did the open house for this project, and we only received 1 public comment, and that's included in your staff report. Compliance with the master plan policies, that is also included in the staff report, and then compliance with the standards for general amendments. It did comply with that as well. And so again, staff is recommending approval based on the staff's proposed text to amend 21A46052.
Is your applicant here?
I did not see him, actually,
Okay,
so I'm not sure.
so any questions for staff?
So staff, I have just a clarification for me.
Sure.
So in your recommendations in attachment A, on point 4, you talk about that a sign face may include multiple separate sign panels. What is that going to look like? What does that mean?
So for example, the East High School sign has 3 panels. Some of the pole signs you'll see will have 2 sign panels. In a local street, what that would look like is 1 sign face equaling 180 square feet, 2 sign faces equal 90, or 3 equaling 60.
So the east one at East has 3?
Yes. Yeah, it's triangular.
Okay.
Yeah, so but that would be the combined maximum for all
Okay.
of them,
Thanks.
so.
Any other questions?
Have the existing pole signs been out of compliance with the?
Yes, because there was only 4 school properties that were not located in the PL zone, and the PL zone doesn't allow for pole signs. So that is the reason for the recommendation, 1, to allow them and also set standards for the future.
So I think you may have addressed this, but moving signs of any kind, signs that move or have,
They would be subject to permit and fees and subject to these standards. If they were to move the sign, they would be subject to.
not
Is that
signs,
what you mean?
Not moving the
think she's
sign. I'm talking
thinking
about signs
picture
that flash and
kind of.
move.
Oh, animated, they would be.
Animated signs, help me with the word there, folks. Yeah, I guess, yeah, things which, because we restrict those in the city, so why would we have them on school property?
I can jump in. Yeah, they'd be under the same regulations as all of our regular signs as far as that goes. So there couldn't be any movement. If some wording comes up, that wording has to actually remain in place for a certain number of seconds before it changes. So it would be the same regulation.
All right, thank you.
I have a follow-up on that. What about lumen output? There's a sign on I-15 that blinds you at night, and I just want to make sure we're not having super bright signs. Is there any regulation on how bright the sign can be if it is illuminated, like has like a scrolling text, how bright that is?
Wayne can correct me, but that's where the general standards for construction come in, and that's part of the sign ordinance, and they would still have to comply with that. That addresses lighting, nuisance, and other
Just wanted,
clearance, for
just wanted to
example.
double check that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
So why are we even thinking about pole signs? Why not monument signs, especially in neighborhoods?
So I did a study of all the signs on school property, and some have started using more monument signs. But the reason why we're doing this is to make sure that we have standards for new signs, also looking at the signs that are existing. And specifically, this will only affect pole signs on school property. So,
Yeah, but my question is, why are we allowing pole signs on school properties when we can allow monument signs instead?
I could jump in. Actually, in some of the zoning districts, we do allow monument signs. So in a lot of our zoning districts, monument signs are already allowed, but pole signs are not. This is in direct response to kind of a lot of them that have already been put up. And it is only related to schools, so we're not opening this up to every land use in these zones. There's been it's kind of an interesting thing when it comes to schools. We've gone through various time frames where people have thought that schools aren't regulated by our local land use code, whereas actually they are. But there has been confusion even amongst city employees in the past about that. So I just wanted to bring that up. I don't want it to look like this proposal is because the school district has just blatantly not followed our regulations, because in a lot of cases that hasn't been the case. But this is in response to those. We're trying to address the existing signs in place, and then knowing, yeah, we may get a couple of more at some schools. And, that's what we're trying to do with the regulations, limiting the size when they are in neighborhoods. So we try to minimize those impacts, but also recognizing these are signs that are put in place that aren't necessarily there to advertise like a commercial function. These are put in place to try to notify people in the neighborhood community, as well as people driving by, of school functions that are going on.
But they would be allowed on public or on private schools as well, which could have, I realize it has to be an on-premises, but it could be advertising for on-premise activities.
Well, it's advertising the school itself. Sure.
Right. And I also, if there's right now a prohibition against moving words on signs, I know the Highland High School sign says wrestling next week at blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like, words are scrolling across that sign already.
Anyone else?
I'm wondering about Newman Elementary and on Colorado Street in Rose Park. That school is totally contained within the block and has no street frontage at all. And the entryway to it is about 50 feet wide, and you go in off Colorado Street, but the main entrance is probably 200 feet away from where the entryway to the parking lot is. And there are houses within 15 feet on each side of that entryway. So I'm wondering if we could exclude individual schools from being allowed to have a pole sign at all, because I would think that if I lived next door to that school or on the outfacing street, because everybody's backyard is on the faces the school grounds, but a pole sign there, brightly lit or not, would probably disturb some of the neighbors who live close to that entryway.
Megan, you want me to jump in? So we probably can't prohibit them on specific schools, but if the planning commission is interested in addressing that potential impact, you can require them to be a pole sign to be a certain distance away from a residential use. The state has basically a uniform zoning law that says we have to treat similar buildings the same. And so if we just say this building can't have it, but this building can, we're violating that. And so there's ways we can do it. Like I said, if you're interested, we can require a sign to be X distance from a residential use to help reduce that impact.
If this change is not approved, what happens to the 10 signs that are currently existing?
They would be non-conforming, right?
No, well, they're not non-conforming because they were
Conforming.
never
Yeah.
legally constructed. Some of them might have been. Some of them I think have been around for a long time, and maybe we'd have to go back and check the history. But it is possible that the city could enforce against the school district and have them remove those signs or bring them into compliance.
Okay, let's open the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on this item? Seeing no one, I will close the public.
Madam Chair.
Oh, I forget about the emails, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. We received an email and letter from Judy Short of the Sugar House Community Council. She apologized that she hadn't sent this in previously and asked that we read it. It showed up at 5, so I told
Okay.
her that
Madam Chair, her comments are in our Dropbox report.
we just put those in, I think.
No, I read them. I read them over the
Good.
weekend. Yeah.
So is this new or?
And so Madam Chair, I just wanted to clarify if they were new
Oh, okay.
Is
from
it-
what we read in the
it's something
Community
she
Council
sent
report.
today?
No, it's the same letter. She had just sent an email in at about 5 o'clock this afternoon and said, "Hey, I didn't see this in the staff report, and I noticed that she thought that she hadn't actually emailed it, so it looks like
Okay,
it did come
okay.
in
But it is in the staff report. Okay,
Yes, I read
so
it.
everybody's.
in your Dropbox."
In the Dropbox.
Yeah, it was in
so-
the staff report. I read it over the weekend.
Okay, so I don't think you need to read it, Wayne.
Okay.
Okay, now,
I recall also seeing it in the staff report over the weekend, but maybe the staff report changed. But the email is definitely in there in any case.
Okay, as long as everybody's on the same page, I will close the public hearing on this item and bring it back to the commission for discussion or a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Gent.
Based on the information presented and discussion.
I need a second. Oh,
Second.
thank you. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. Okay, go.
Okay, based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission recommend that the city council approve this proposal for a zoning text amendment.
Thank you. And a second?
I second.
And a second. Okay, I have a motion from Commissioner Gant and a second from Commissioner De Oliveira. Commissioner Gale,
Yes.
Commissioner Gant,
Yes.
Commissioner Lee,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Shear,
I am not in favor of increasing pole signs, so I'm going to say no.
thank you. Commissioner Paredes,
I'll vote yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira,
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
No.
Commissioner Barry.
Yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 9 in favor and 2 against. So we're sending a positive recommendation. Okay, we'll move on to item number 2, which is a zoning map amendment at approximately 792 West, 900 South, case number PLN PCM 2022-00587. Welcome, Caitlin.
Good evening. Just gonna wait for this to pull up. All right. So this is for the zoning map amendment for two properties located at 792 West, 900 South, and 875 South, 800 West. The request is to rezone the two properties from M1, which is light manufacturing, to RMU, which is residential mixed use. And the recommendation of the planning staff is that the planning commission forward a negative recommendation to the city council. So this map shows the subject properties highlighted in red, and the master plan, the West Side master plan, largely promotes redevelopment in nodes and corridors. This property is located in between the 700 West Industrial Corridor and the 9th and 9th neighborhood node. Because most of the guidance in the master plan is about redevelopment in those areas, and this isn't in either, we had to hunt the plan for language about the areas in between. And the areas in between, the redevelopment potential is largely context driven. So the context of this block, I forgot to highlight it, but the property is right here. The context of the block is largely single-family residential. Even though half of the block is zoned M1, it has largely maintained its long-time single-family development pattern. There are two commercial buildings and industrial buildings on that half of the block, and then the other half of the block was recently rezoned to RMU. We can discuss that if you have questions about it. Across the street is the R1 5000 zone, which again is largely single-family residential. And across 900 South is the Utah Paper Box facility, and it is largely buffered from the property by the 9-line trail. So some of the key considerations, again, we had to look for the spaces in between language, and largely, we found a couple instances, but largely the language of the master plan is that development in these areas needs to be driven by the context of the surrounding neighborhood. Their plan is dedicated to making sure that the neighborhood fabric of the established single-family neighborhoods is preserved, and any infill development needs to be compatible with that. We found a couple instances, as you can see here, where it mentions compatible infill, adhere to the prevailing development of the development pattern. Building heights should be restricted to 35 feet when they're near a residential node, that kind of thing. So comparing the two zones, M1 obviously is not an appropriate zone for this area, considering it is largely a single-family area. The maximum building height is 65 feet and is designed for light manufacturing. However, the RMU zone also isn't really appropriate for this area because its purpose is specifically to create high-density urban neighborhoods, which isn't called for in the master plan. Maximum building heights are 75 feet, which would dwarf the single-family zones next to it. And while the size of the properties wouldn't really allow for 75-foot development, it would allow for height over 35 feet, which, as the master plan is established, isn't really compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. So the standards of the approval, as you know, this proposal has to be consistent with the master plan, meets specific purpose statements of the zoning ordinance, not negatively impact adjacent properties, and as the staff report is described, the proposed RMU zone isn't really appropriate for the zone. So while a rezone is appropriate, it should be something less intense than the RMU zone. And I should also note that we received a number of letters in support of the rezone, specifically the residential component that would be provided by the RMU zone. We received a letter from the Poplar Grove City Community Council, and a couple of emails from residents that were in support of the proposal. We have not received any negative support. or negative feedback. So as such, based on the findings in the staff report, it's planning staff's opinion that the request does not meet the applicable standards of approval, and therefore the planning commission should forward a negative recommendation onto the city council.
Okay, is this the applicant?
This is Cameron.
Yes.
Do you have a presentation? State your name for the record, and then you'll have
excited to be here
10
with
minutes.
you. Great.
It's okay,
just
I'll time you.
I'm just going to set it so I'm respectful of your time and made our guidelines for 10 minutes. Yeah, my name is Cameron Broadbent. I own a couple properties on 800 West, one to the north, 1 block, one to the south, 2 blocks.
You might need to get a little closer to the microphone.
Okay, yeah, sure. I just wanted to start by saying thank you for being here. I've watched several hours of Planning Commission meeting, and I can
sorry.
clearly tell. I bet I've watched 12 hours. I could call out certain preferences, but really, and I could, that I really respect, actually. There's some of you that are very concerned about people, and thank you. I'm really excited to be here tonight, and I think personally that I'm just simply asking, my wife and I are asking for your support to use these 2 lots in a way, I've worked on them for several years, use them in a way that I think is in harmony with 7 Salt Lake City master plans, and I'll kind of outline some of what that looks like. I brought this so we could kind of all see it. I hope you can kind of see it. I think it's helpful to step back and look and see that half of this entire block is already RMU zoned. And a full half of the block face is fully zoned RMU. And then it's separated with this little alley today. And what I'm proposing is that it would be separated, instead of a little alley, it would be separated with a 90-foot separation from RMU to single-family homes. And that 90-foot separation is one of the largest in the city today. It's my intent to build a 4-plex on each of the 2 lots. So keep in mind that on this end, it's slated for a mega apartment complex. And on my end, it would be like a 4-plex on each lot. I'd like to invite you to consider the intensity of use as well a little bit. But today, a hotel is actually approved for M1. So we could go build a hotel today. But I don't think as a property owner that would integrate people, long-term tenants, into the fabric of our community. And I think a multifamily zone, not allowed today. It needs to be in an RMU zone to get multifamily. I think that would better allow people to be incorporated into our community. Some of the initial, and it was touched on here, some of the initial concerns is that I could possibly build something, even though it's my wife and I say that I'm only going to build a 4-plex or a duplex or a triplex. I could possibly build more. And while you could possibly build to 75 feet in RMU, that's really not a discussion that is material, because on both sides of this, there are power lines. And because of the power lines are there, fire code actually limits the height of the building to 30 feet. Could that be overcome? Yes. With $2.5 million, that was the bid from Pacific Corp in March of last year to actually bury the power lines. So from a practical nature, it's really not practical. Now, some people still won't be satisfied. So I looked around at a precedent that Salt Lake City has done, and I noticed that across many zoning districts, they use a deed restriction to actually limit bad behavior, right? Or people that want, and I look specifically at the ADU deed restriction. So I voluntarily, last July, recorded a deed restriction limiting the height to 35 feet. And I used the ADU deed restriction as my guideline, given how often I see it used across multiple zoning districts today. I have copies. That's not in your staff report, but it seemed material to what we're talking about. Because not only am I telling people that I'm going to build something modest in size, I also recorded it and gave up my right, and I'll actually enforce it as another property owner trying to clean up the area. As we look to what the standard is for RMU, I'd invite us to consider the word standard for a moment and think of a standard as a model of how we should build. And then let's look at the code and actually read what it talks about when it talks about the standard for RMU. It says this, in 21A 24-170, it says, quote, the standards for the district, and I'm referring to the RMU zoning district standards, are intended to facilitate the creation of a walkable urban neighborhood with an emphasis on pedestrian scale activity. It's interesting to note that the 9-line corridor is one of the few streets in Salt Lake City recent history to have its own, very own master plan. As we look at the core of why it exists, it seems to exist to help create and encourage a pedestrian, non-car transportation corridor designed to create a walkable urban neighborhood. The master plan clearly matches the standard for using RMU zoning. This evening, we have the opportunity to recommend aligning a zoning standard with the master plan. This isn't the only master plan that suggests we should do this. Page 10 of the West Side Master Plan outlines that 89% of the West Side is single-family homes, 2% duplex, and 9% multifamily. Of the 9% multifamily, over 50% of that is concentrated in 6 developments, or 6 complexes. It outlines that today, multifamily isn't well integrated into the residential community. And if it could speak, it would ask us to better integrate small multifamily or multifamily in general with single-family homes. And if you look at this, I think you would agree that we actually accomplished that. Page 33 of the West Side Master Plan says, quote, there are also several vacant and underutilized parcels that could be developed in infill parcels and depending on their size could be seen as opportunities for multifamily projects. Page 107 of the Salt Lake City Transit Master Plan 2017 Executive's Summary invited people to use a tool that they called Design Your Own Transit System tool. Using this tool, 43% of people asked for improved access to transit on foot and by bike. As we look at millennials 18 to 36, who may have a higher tendency to rent in downtown Salt Lake and possibly could rent this place, they take 16% more walking trips than others, 24% more biking trips. The Transportation Equity for Salt Lake City's West Side Study 2021 shines a light on equitable access. Something that's enjoyed on the east side is the ability to live in a small multifamily unit, a fourplex, and walk to Liberty Park or a major park. If we looked at what's available around the International Peace Park, we'd see very limited equitable access, if you would. This zoning change allows for a small multifamily to be built and allows equitable access to people on the west side who would like to enjoy the same thing that east siders enjoy today around Liberty Park. When we look at development today that's come to this room, we see a lot of mega apartment complexes that actually put retail on the main floor. More and more, we see ground level living disappearing. This zoning change allows ground level living to come back to those people that may need it or want it. Lastly, if we were going to do this and I was on the other side of that mic, on your side, I would ask myself, perhaps we've done this somewhere else nearby. And I think there's a great example. We don't have to go very far. And if we're looking for an example, we need to look at places that have non-car transportation corridors. We can look specifically at a place. We just go up the street and we'll find a place. You go up the street 900 South and we'll get to 200 West. When we get to 200 West and we start going south, we would hit a 2-story I-15 artery. Right after the 2-story I-15 artery, we'd see a duplicate of this block. You see RMU, then you see single-family homes, followed by RMU on the other end. What's interesting about this is there's only a 45-foot separation between more single-family homes. When we look at the one I'm proposing, there's actually a 90-foot. We actually have an exact duplicate. I'd also like to point out that I was here on this separation yesterday. So half the block is RMU. You have 3 single-family homes. What separates them today is this much space. I stood yesterday on the space, stretched out my arms, and this is how much space separates RMU today from single-family homes, assuming you don't want to drive in the gutter. This zoning change allows for something that feels normal and natural, and that is a 90-foot space to separate RMU from other single-family homes. I consider it good planning. And then if we were to look, the last thing for good planning, we ought to ask the people in the neighborhood. And I've talked to some. I talked to the community council chair, who was in full support and practically wrote a 4-paragraph essay supporting it. I ask for your support tonight.
Thank you. Okay, I'll bring it up to the commission. Do you have any questions for staff or for Mr. Broadbent?
I do. So, staff, Katie Lynn, can you walk us through the different zones that would allow fourplexes?
Yeah, there's quite a few. There's RMU 35, which would be appropriate. It could allow for any number of residential uses. It allows for 2-family, 1-family, and multi-use. The newly adopted RMF 30 would allow for it. That one might require a planned development because these lots are so small. But there are a couple of less intense zones that would allow for fourplexes on this site.
Do the RMF 35 allow for it?
I didn't do a deep dive into RMF 35, mostly because it hasn't really been updated yet, and it would likely need a planned development.
So then to the applicant, why are you going for an RMU versus RMU 35 if the RMU 35 would accomplish what you want to do?
It gets close, but it doesn't. It actually poses some concerns. RMU 35 has some mandatory minimum and mandatory maximum setbacks. As a 10-foot window in which you have to set back the structure. And that could impact us because we're trying to fit 2 homes on the lot in a symmetrical, natural, and normal way, and also be respectful of the house to the north and setting our home away from their property line. Let me just give you an example. If I wanted to set back this a structure 16 feet from the property line, that would be unacceptable in RMU 35, but acceptable in RMU.
I think this is a difficult part where we don't have a specific proposal, and so it's hard to evaluate that type of a setback, because you could ask for an exception in the RMF or the RMU 35. If you wanted to exceed that setback, you'd have to come before us to do it, but we've done, usually it's the opposite direction, but we've done ones that exceeded the minimum.
In this case specifically, I've thought the same thing. In order to get parking, because I think to be respectful to the community, I'd like to get parking. To do that, I'd like to set it as far south almost as I could. Currently, the lot is set back, for whatever reason, the lot line doesn't begin until 12 feet back after the sidewalk, which is quite a bit more than maybe others and I've dealt with in my other homes in the neighborhood.
So staff, given that idea of the setback issues, could hypothetically a fourplex with a 16-foot setback be allowed or doable in other zones as well?
It's hard to say, like you said, without an exact development plan to look at. It's hard to say.
That's fine. Thank you.
I think it's helpful to note that the parking as well in the RMU 35 requires one parking stall for each door, and that's in addition to the, how you would back up. And if you look inside my proposal, the lot is already about half parking, and it still doesn't meet 1 per unit.
Oh, pardon me. Go ahead.
Sorry. I guess if I understand correctly, some of this is to give you flexibility so you don't have to come before us. And, we know every round you have to come before us, costs you more in financing, and this gets translated into higher rents and home prices. So we are sympathetic to, additional approvals in the process, adding to our housing costs. I guess, I'm always so hopeful that we might see street level retail. I realize that maybe, it's so hopeful, but sometimes, and maybe this is a question for staff, is there any possibility of a development agreement with something specific in place that, when do we usually see these development agreements with the city that come as part of a zoning change?
So typically, at least in Salt Lake, development agreements are usually applied when there's some added condition that ultimately the city council wants to include. So it's usually a restriction on development. So, in a situation like this where it's an RMU zone that allows buildings up to 75 feet in height, if that's determined to be unacceptable, but the other parameters are fine, then you could suggest a development agreement to limit that height to something more, something lower.
Yeah, okay, so this is useful to know so that we could put this as part of our recommendation if we felt that this was appropriate, because I do understand the concern that, we're sort of writing a blank check with an RMU, and we understand your intent is to build. It's not to doubt your intent and what you're saying, but I do understand the
And we
concern.
also voluntarily recorded a deed restriction already, limiting height to 35 feet.
Okay.
Can I speak
Can
to
I
that?
ask who the
Sure.
beneficiary of that
The beneficiary?
deed restriction is?
Well, as a community member, I would enforce it myself, but the Salt Lake City Administrator is written into this
Yeah.
as having authority to release it. If the whole block were to be developed and we said, well, we need high rises here, there is the opportunity for a Salt Lake City Administrator to release that.
Yeah, I don't know. Development agreements seem relatively straightforward to me. But anyway, we can deal with that when we get to the general discussion, I think. Thank you.
I kept trying to interrupt you, Commissioner Gant, and I'm so sorry. I apologize. That's not very kind of me. So I apologize. I'll take my turn now. I think I have 4 things, if I can remember all of them. So backing up to a higher level, staff, do we know when the M1 zone was put on this area? And were the single-family homes already in existence at that time?
Do you know?
As far as
Karen?
I know, yes, they were in existence already. They were built around the turn of the century. Some of them were later, some of them were around then. And when the highway got put in and the rail line got put in, that area was a kind of industrial corridor, originally planned to be an industrial corridor, but since then we've changed our mind and we don't want it to be an industrial corridor anymore.
Okay.
My guess is that it's been zoned M1 since 1995, and prior to that's when the last citywide zoning rewrite was done. And prior to that, it was probably zoned. We had a variety of different zones, industrial zones. In one point, this corridor was actually unzoned.
But
at
these
some
are
point.
historic homes
So
that,
they've been there
for the most
for a long
most
time.
part, have been there.
Been there for a
longer.
really long time.
So
might
I
be
think
helpful,
there's
though.
a, yes, go
I
ahead.
mean, it might be helpful to just consider that right next to this lot is about a 1/3 acre with a warehouse on it.
Right, yes, and I understand that, but we don't plan based necessarily all the time on what already exists, especially if we have evidence that says that generally the master plan and former commissions have directed that they would like to see this more as an M1 zone, regardless of what's currently existing. So I think I asked that question because I get where it seems like what might be permitted under an M1 zone would not be consistent with the surrounding neighborhood. However, I don't think our plans or the current zoning reflect that that was in the plan, regardless of whether it fits in with the neighborhood or not. I think what we see in the history of what has been done for this area is that we are trying to make some changes and that we're planning ahead rather than trying to just say, hey, this exists here and hey, that exists there, which goes to another point I had, which is I appreciate you bringing in these visuals so that we can see what exists in some other places.
I don't know that that necessarily sets the precedent for us making this specific of a zoning change on this small of an area. And I will just speak to the idea of development agreements. I won't say what the city or the city council would or would not do. I work in land development, and it would be very atypical to see a development agreement on this small of a parcel because the general plan has already been so specific and the zoning has already been so specific. So there are two more things, and I'll do I think I'll do your deed restriction last. So unless I just forgot the first thing, which may be the case. All right, we're going to do the other thing last. So on the deed restriction, staff asks about a beneficiary because, you know, you created the deed restriction, and without a beneficiary who actually has enforcement rights, you certainly could enforce it, but as having created it, you could also release it. We haven't reviewed the text of that, but just from a legal standpoint, without a beneficiary that is designated in the deed restriction, it really is not enforceable. So regardless of whether the Salt Lake City administrator can release it in the future or not, that does not give them necessarily enforcement rights. So for a deed restriction to be effective in that way, it would have to be specific for all of those. And frankly, a later owner of the property, say it wasn't developed and they purchased it later, there are legal actions they could take to have that released regardless. So I just don't have personally a lot of confidence that the deed restriction is going to do what you're hoping and what we would hope it would do were this to be approved. And I'm sorry because you seem to have thought this out very well, and you have neighbors who are excited about it, but I just don't think it fits in the planning, and I think that's evidenced by the fact that 3 out of the required 4 standards for this kind of change are not, they're not met. So for me personally, I would not feel comfortable going against the planning department's recommendations, particularly in an instance where we have 75% of the standards that are not met for this change.
Okay, any other questions for the applicant or staff?
I'd like to know how big the parcel is. How wide is it? How big are those 2 lots? How wide are those 2 lots?
So I think they're roughly one way. Each lot is nearly 30 feet. I think it runs 29, and the other way is 80.
So
And that's
80 by
80 by about 29.
129?
29.
29 feet wide?
Yeah.
The
Correct.
parcels?
That's correct, as it sits today. Now, if Salt Lake City would actually, if they'll sell me, and we haven't gotten to this point, but if they'll sell the property that is just sitting there on the inside of the sidewalk, we can almost increase that first lot at least by 50%.
But that's a setback that's got, you know, utilities presumably and other things in it, right?
That's right, it could.
Okay, so I doubt that they're going to sell you that. So, as it stands now, these lots are a total of
0.05 acres
0.05?
each, 0.1
Okay,
together.
so 0.1 acres, 1/10 of an acre, and it is 60 feet wide by maybe 80 feet long, the whole thing.
Did I get that right? Is it 80
That
close?
sounds about right. I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So if we don't have any more questions right now, I will open the public hearing. Is there anyone from the community council who would like to speak on this? Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on this item? Seeing no one, I will, Wayne, emails. No? Okay. Thank you. Since there's no one that wants to speak on this, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion and a motion.
I would like to speak on this a little bit from the standpoint of just, I do think it's appropriate for low-scale residential multifamily. The idea that an RMF 35 would be ideal, but I understand that the setbacks on RMF 35 might actually have some issue. You might have some issue with those. That would be difficult to do. I'm pretty comfortable saying, you know, okay, RMF, because this parcel is too small to actually build anything that has elevators and, you know, structure that would substantially allow it to be more than 35 feet tall. You're just not going to get there with this particular size of lot. And so under those circumstances, unless the applicant buys the another 7 lots north of him and tears those houses down and approaches it that way, in which case an RMF might be an appropriate zone anyway. That's all I have to say.
Are we looking at an RMF zone on this?
I think you mean
I think she means
RMU.
RMU.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. No.
Yeah, I guess my that's really useful, Brenda. I hadn't really thought about that because I don't have your architecture background. I guess, you know, we've talked about this previously. When we have an opportunity to add density where we have neighborhood support, we have so much resistance most of the time. I don't see drastically horrible consequences of, like, you know, the downside risk seems limited in this case. And in terms of the standards, what I didn't hear talked about is our overall goal of improving our air quality, which I know is important to council. And we need density. Like, the only way you get walkability and bikeability and less driving is density. That's the only, and same with sort of variety of housing types that we know is in our overall city goals. So to me, there are standards this is meeting, and yeah, maybe there's some other way of getting around it, but it's just going to take more time to get there. And so the downside risk just seems really limited here. So I'd be in support of it.
I'm going to just emphasize again that 3 out of 4 required standards are not met in this application. So it is not complying with 3 of 4 required factors. There are 5 factors. 1 is not required. 1 it complies with. 3 it does not comply with. And for me personally, and in my mind, I would have to have something very significant to overcome that kind of failure to comply that has been pointed out by our planning department and staff. And I just don't see that here. I think a lot of us have in our minds right now what Cameron has very coherently described as what he plans to do with the property. But this is not a case where we're rezoning a large area and binding a developer to a development agreement. This is a case where we would be changing the zone based on an anticipated use and an anticipated plan that does not exist. And so, you know, whether he acquires additional lots or not, whether he acquires the part from the city or not, or whether it's going to be actually 2 fourplexes or not, is a little bit moot, because what we're being asked to do is to look specifically at whether it's appropriate to rezone this little corner based on the general plan and based on the current zoning there. And we have a recommendation in front of us that shows pretty clearly that this is not complying with 75% of the standards that we'd be looking at.
Well, that's true, but the reason we're here is that we can make a judgment based on what's in front of us. And what I see is an M1 zone that doesn't fit in an outdated standard that no longer meets our city's requirements. We have a housing shortage, and this has been M1 for a long time, and it's incredibly outdated, and we need to start looking at these zones critically and start thinking about what we can do to make a difference now and not just rely on decades-old code that hasn't been updated.
Well, then I think it's not our job to update the code either, unless I'm mistaken.
It is.
Someone can, we don't have a code amendment in front of us, do we?
We made the same decision on the lot next door to this. We used the same kind of thought process as a body and made a decision.
Sorry,
on
which lot?
the RMU that's right next door to this.
The half block?
Yeah,
Rather than the 1/10 of an acre, right? It's a full half block.
it
that went
is,
into RMU.
but if I could do it, I would do the entire thing because that would make the most sense. But that's not what's in front of us today. Today is dealing with kind of an area that is desperately needed to be more dense, and that's what's in front of us is, can we help that along, or are we going to keep this an industrial zone that really doesn't help the city in any way?
And, you know,
Yet still fits with the general plan and was put in place by zoning previously,
An
correct?
outdated general plan.
and I think that, you know, I would point to the standards again. I agree that it would be unwise perhaps sometimes to make a change where there 3 out of 4 standards aren't completed. However, I disagree with the staff's judgment on these particular issues, on all three of them, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, that was sort of my reaction as well, Brenda, particularly with the first one, whether a proposed amendment is consistent with the purposes, goals, objectives, and policies of the city as stated through its various adopted planning documents. We repeatedly have emphasized equity. We've repeatedly emphasized a variety of housing types, increased density, something that improves our air quality. So there, I mean, with all due respect, I understand there's a lot to consider here, but I think it depends. We are not given the city has not given us, put 10% weight on this standard and 3% weight on this standard and 6%. So there's some subjective weights in trying to meet all our different goals. And so I think there is room to disagree on some of these findings.
Absolutely.
Can
Yes,
we
sir.
have staff address some of those specific questions as to the decision-making process and why they found some of these don't comply?
Can you
I can.
enlighten us?
Yeah, so the biggest standards that we looked at were from the West Side Master Plan, which wasn't adopted that long ago. It was 2012, I believe. So it's not exactly an outdated plan. And the plan emphasizes the desire of the community to maintain its fabric as a established single-family neighborhood with compatible infill. Personally, I agree that a fourplex is considered a compatible infill, but it could also be accomplished under a different zone with a plan of development, which is an already established process in our code, as opposed to an RMU, which isn't appropriate because that is specifically designed to be a high-density zone, not a low to medium-density zone. And so that would have to have some exceptions made to it, like a development agreement, in order for it to accommodate the type of development that is called for in the West Side Master Plan, as well as,
Could I just offer rebuttal to that? Does it, because we were done, and then we came back to staff. Could I just offer just an insight to that comment?
Okay.
Could I just ask you, what would take precedent? A West Side Master Plan over the entire West Side, or a 9-line corridor plan, who at its core actually is inviting us to create a walkable urban neighborhood? And I think the
I'm not sure I
9-line
understand the rebuttal. Can you,
Well, yeah, I just
staff,
think
can you
the
help me
9-line
understand
corridor.
what?
so there are other,
West
the
Side's-
RMU zone isn't the only zone that is designed to create walkable neighborhoods.
That's a good point.
RMU 35 is designed to create walkable neighborhoods and is designed to be a buffer zone between higher density development and low density development. Like, it states that in the plan or in the zoning code, the RMU 35 is a buffer zone between those types of land uses. So staff agrees that M1 is not an appropriate zone for this area for a multitude of reasons. But the RMU zone itself, based on its purpose, isn't an appropriate zone either.
Madam Chair, can I?
Yes, ma'am.
So Mr. Broadbent, now you know why our meetings last 3 to 5 hours.
You average about 4. I've watched about 12 hours.
It's an easy one to watch 12 hours in one spell. I think it is a leap of faith on both our part and your part when we get a proposal for a rezone that is not accompanied with a plan. We have a leap of faith in saying, like, yes, you'll do what you say. I don't think for the most part we ever think otherwise. But a lot happens in between in my history of seeing parcels where you sell it. And then somebody else can come in and do something else because we have a zone. It's a leap of faith on your part because we can't evaluate exactly the parts that are in play here. So in the question period earlier, I now understand the reason why you're going for RMU is because of setbacks and parking, but I still can't evaluate that completely appropriately without the proposal. And
In the back of
and
the
I think,
packet was a
well,
proposal.
I'm just gonna make my comment, and then I agree with Brenda's point that the lot size limits a lot of what you can do, but I do think that staff has analyzed this well, and that there are other. Just given the rezone question, there are other zones that meet what you want to do, and in the absence of having a proposal to actually review, I'm in favor of going with staff's recommendation, but ultimately I think this is a great corner for your intended statement. I think it would have been better if we had a proposal to review along with this so we could have made a fuller judgment call. Because I think a rezone is entirely appropriate for this area and what you want to do, I'm fully in support of. But given that we're only recommending to the city council what we think they should do, that's the only question before us. And based on the analysis, I'm personally in favor of a negative recommendation for RMU.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
Based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the Commission recommend that the City Council approve this zoning map amendment proposal for the following reasons. It improves the density with minimal neighborhood complaint, which meets Salt Lake's goals of a variety of housing types and improving our air quality.
Second.
Was that
I would like to make another motion.
Brenda?
Okay.
Commissioner Scheer, you were the second? Okay.
Madam Chair, point of clarification, just for my edification on this.
Yes, ma'am.
So typically when we make a recommendation contrary to staff's opinion, we have to tie it to a specific standard and a point in the standards. Do we not have to do that here?
So I can help with this. So the code specifically lists factors to consider in zoning amendments. And so that doesn't mean that every single factor has to be complied with. It means, and I think this was mentioned, you do have some discretion about how you apply each one of those to unique situations. And so I think all the commission really needs to do with that is to make some kind of a statement about which factor they're using to make that motion.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we will vote on Commissioner Gant's motion. Commissioner Barry.
Wait. Sorry, Madam Chair, another point of clarification. And the attorney might have to weigh in on this. For procedural purposes, if we have someone else who wants to make an alternate motion, they would do that before we had a vote, correct?
Correct. A commissioner may make a substitute motion prior to a vote on the original motion. And I believe I heard Commissioner Gale try to offer a substitute motion.
Yeah.
Okay, so make your motion.
Okay, I'd like to make a substitute motion that based on the information presented in discussion, I would move that the commission recommend that the city council deny this zoning map amendment proposal. And I would add to that they look at this area to determine what appropriate zoning would be.
Do I have a second for the substitute motion?
I would second it, but not with the added part to it. I don't.
Point of order?
To amend that.
Do we vote on
Well, she can
both
amend.
motions at that point?
No,
given
we
they
vote
are-
on the substitute motion first and then the original motion.
Can I make another substitute motion?
Yeah, is there a limit
Wait,
to how
wait,
many
Do we just keep
substitutes?
substituting motions?
Excuse me, I'm confused about this too. Doesn't the original motion have to accept the
No, not
substitute?
according to Robert's rules.
Okay.
So are you willing to, Commissioner Gale, are you willing to amend your motion?
Yeah, we can
to get
amend
the
that.
second?
Yes, we can amend that for sure, just to say that I move the commission recommend that the city council deny the zoning map amendment proposal based on the information and discussion we've had this evening.
I'll second that one.
Commissioner Burrows, okay. Okay, then we do the
Repeat the motion,
substitute
I didn't
motion
hear it.
first.
I didn't hear the motion, I'm sorry.
The motion is that I move the commission recommend that the city council deny this zoning map amendment proposal based on information presented and our discussion.
Oh, point of order. We don't actually deny it. We forward a negative
I
recommendation.
said that we recommend the city council deny it.
Okay,
Okay, sorry.
okay, so we do the substitute motion first? Paul? Yes. Okay, so you're voting on Commissioner Gale's motion to forward the negative recommendation to the city council.
Can I ask a point of order? If that motion fails, do we go back to my original motion?
That's correct.
Yes. Commissioner Gale?
I vote yes on my motion.
Commissioner Gent?
No.
Commissioner Lee?
No.
Commissioner Tuttle?
No.
Commissioner Shear?
No.
Commissioner Paredes?
I'll vote no.
Commissioner De Oliveira?
No.
Commissioner Christensen?
No.
Commissioner Burrows?
Yes.
Commissioner Barry?
Yes.
The chair would also vote yes. 1, 2, 3, 4 yeses, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 noes. The substitute motion fails. So we go back to Commissioner Gent's motion. And Commissioner Shear, you seconded that one?
I did, yes.
Thank you. Okay, we'll vote on the original motion. Commissioner Barry?
No.
Commissioner Burrows?
No.
Commissioner Christensen?
Yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira?
Yes.
Commissioner Paredes?
I'll vote no.
Commissioner Shearer?
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle?
Yes.
Commissioner Lee?
Yes.
Commissioner Gent?
Yes.
And Commissioner Gale?
No.
And the chair would also vote no. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yeses. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 noes. So that passes 6 yeses to 5 noes. So it will be the positive recommendation. Now that we got through that, we have one more item here.
Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Item number 3 is the alley vacation at approximately 2167 South, 800 East. Case number PLN PCM 2022-00802. Diana.
Good evening. Yes, help yourself. No, thank you.
Look at this. Yeah. It's a mess. I know what I want to say. Didn't do.
Okay, sorry. I think
No,
we're
go
ready.
right ahead.
Okay, so this is an alley vacation request at approximately 2167 South 800 East. This request is to vacate a portion of that alley that runs west to east between 800 and 900 East within the block north of Wilmington Avenue and south of Commonwealth Avenue.
So as you look at the map, 2100 South is the most north road on this map. Commonwealth is also a west-east through road going from 8th to 9th. And then down at the bottom, also Wilmington Avenue does the same. It goes through west to east. And then at the very bottom of my map is the Sugar House S-Line streetcar line and trail. The portion requested to be vacated is 7.3 feet wide by 156.7 feet long, and it is located at the westmost section of the alley beginning at 800 East. So as you can see on the map, in the red, this is the only bit of portion that is being requested for the vacation. The rest of the alley, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but from here to 9th East would remain open. Staff's recommendation, based on the findings and analysis in my staff report, planning staff recommends that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council with the following condition: that a utility easement is established in place of the existing public right-of-way. And this is kind of to appease the engineering department and utility departments to be able to keep utilities accessible within that area. Here are some pictures. This is looking at the portion of the alley that from 8th East. I've marked, I hope you can see it, I've marked a little green dotted line. That is pretty much, of course it's not accurate, but that's about where the alley portion starts, and it goes to this fence line. Everything on the other side of this green line would belong to the homeowner at 2167 South. But it is this long area here that goes past this truck. This picture on the right is actually beyond the truck. This piece of fence that you can see, I forgot what the fence is called. Chain link fence, thank you, my goodness, chain link fence. That is the end of the property, and that is where the end of the portion of the alley is being requested to be vacated. Thank you. These pictures are a little different. You're going to have to switch your head because now we're looking at this point right here is where the chain link fence is. And now we're looking west from the 9th East side of the alley. In addition to that chain link fence, just about 70 feet more to the east is another fence that was put up by a different neighbor. And so it kind of blocks the alleyway at this point, like I said, for that 70 feet. And then you've got the point of where the requested alley vacation portion would begin. This bottom picture is looking at that fence that's 70 feet to the east. And this is looking again to the west from the 9th East side of the alley. The picture on the left is looking a little bit more than halfway from the alley portion of 9th East, looking westward. And then the last picture on the right is looking from the very top part, of 900 East down the alleyway. Just to go through the alley vacation process a little bit, because I'm not sure that everyone has gone through this. The request comes to the Planning Commission for consideration and recommendation to the City Council, and then the application goes to the City Council for ultimate decision. If the alley vacation is approved by the City Council, then the property involved will be conveyed to the property owners that are within the platted subdivision that the alleyway is platted. I'm going to skip, I'm going to show you this. So if you can see the yellow portion here, this is the portion that's within the request to be vacated. The pink, and let me go back, the yellow is 7.3 feet wide. The pink area is 13 feet wide, and that entire strip
is what would remain open, regardless if if this was approved to be vacated. Within this box, this green box, there's 4 properties. Those 4 properties are the abutting property owners to the portion that's being requested to be vacated, and those are the people that would receive or be conveyed the property of the alley if it was approved by the city council to be vacated. Just to show you this is the subdivision. I think you can see it a little bit. The red at the top actually shows the part of the alley that belongs to this subdivision, Forestdale Addition subdivision. The green portion is the other half of the alley at that east point, but it's public, it belongs to the city, but it is not part of the subdivision. So at this point, we're only dealing with 4 residents that abut Wilmington, that also abut this portion of the alleyway that is being requested to be vacated. So next to me, I have the property owner of 2167 who uses, I'm going to go back to the picture, who uses, so this is his home. He uses, like I noted, a good portion of the alleyway for his driveway, and that has been done. I'm going to let him talk about that a little bit more, but possibly as early as 1999, if not earlier. And then his wife is next to him, and the petitioner, Denise Vance, is to the far left. It is. Do you want more?
It's something to get your head around, right? Does the applicant have a presentation?
No presentation, but they're willing to answer questions.
Okay, so if the commissioners have questions specifically about this, we can ask them now, then we'll do the public hearing, and we'll bring it back for discussion.
A quick question for staff, Madam Chair. You mentioned that the property owner, one of the property owners, has been using it open and notoriously for like 20 years?
Correct, or longer, yes.
And it's not considered automatically his property under adverse possession laws because it's open space? That's the reason it's not adverse possession?
It's not, but I'm going to defer to legal to explain why it is not just automatically his.
Apologies. You cannot adversely possess government property.
That's right.
Will you clear up for me again? The petitioner is in the same subdivision.
Correct. She's one of the 4 petitioners.
Okay. And then, but does the property go to the adjoining people in the same subdivision, or it goes to somebody totally? How does that happen?
It would only be conveyed to the 4 that abut it.
Okay.
So,
yes. But there would
So-
still, but then the property owner who's using it as a parking way would still get some?
No, so it's conveyed to those 4 property owners, and then after it's conveyed, he would have to purchase it from them. So, and that's a private matter. That's something that the city would not be involved in.
Okay. So, but it's conveyed to the adjoining owners free of charge?
It is, yes. In this case, for a
their
single-family
residential?
situation, it is conveyed free. So they would just add it to their existing property.
And when you say stay open for that pink section, it's not open right now because there are fences and junk.
It is open to a point. I have a better picture in your staff report that notes where the fence ends. There's that second fence that I was talking about is probably a little bit about here, if you can see my cursor.
Yeah.
But you can drive down from 9th East to about this point, and then it gets a little rough with vegetation, and it's not asphalted, and it's hard to get through. It's got a lot of branches and stuff, but you can drive to a point, probably halfway down from 9th East.
What is the enforcement if anybody wanted that alley to just be open, to say, you can't park here anymore, you can't put gates on it?
So this is how this application is coming to you because of a code enforcement issue, because it has been blocked. There has been a lot of vagrants in that area that have caused a little bit of crime and kind of concern for the neighbors. And so code enforcement has been dealing with that. Personally, for the property owner at 2167, he is under enforcement also because the way that he's using the driveway, it's not paved, and we require paved driveways. And so that's a separate kind of issue because he doesn't own most of the driveway. And so we're trying to resolve everything with this application.
Is there an enforcement action on the other neighbor that has a gate?
Not that I've been told. I was on site with my manager and our code enforcement manager, and he did not mention that. I think, that's something.
You can't just gate off alleys, can you?
You can. The problem with this alleyway is a lot of the people have already kind of intruded on the alley property with their fences, and so it's kind of caused an automatic block to some extent in a lot of places. It's not its full width that is measured out as the legal alley width. So on this one in particular, it's had a lot of blockage from a lot of different neighbors.
Is the alley supposed to be 20 feet wide?
It typically, no, it's supposed to be 13. Yeah, so typically 13 is about average. And this one, like I said, aside from a couple of other fences, excuse me, it's pretty open.
Is the alleyway open? I couldn't find the opening on 9th East.
So unfortunately, that's
seems to
another
be gated
problem.
off.
Right, at the top of 9th East is a building that is having a renovation, and they have since blocked it with fencing, with temporary fencing, and that's under code enforcement right now as
Okay.
well. But, so you would have to, if you can see my cursor, this building.
Yeah, you have to go through.
Have to go
found the alley.
around.
I drove about
Yeah, you have to go
3/4
all the way
down
around and
get
then
stuck
over
in
to. Exactly.
a limb. And I'm a very small car, so.
But the alleyway does go all the way out, straight out to 9th East, aside from that temporary fencing that's there.
Okay, any other clarifying questions on anybody's mind? Okay, we'll move to the public hearing. Is there anyone from the community council that wishes to speak on this item? Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on this item?
We actually did receive an email from the community council.
Oh, okay. Do you want to read that? Or is it in our
stuff.
It's in the Dropbox?
So there is a letter in your staff report, but again, Judy Short did send something in this afternoon.
Oh,
and
okay.
she just kind of explained the process for how the community council addressed this. So
would you like me to read the email?
Yeah, why don't you read it?
I'm sorry I cannot be in attendance tonight. The Sugar House Community Council Land Use Committee reviewed this on January 9th after posting this on our website, in the newsletter, and flyers on nearby porches. We had no comments, and the adjacent neighbors had already signed the application, which we had seen. We were amazed that this remained alley for such a long time, as there is a very large tree in the middle of, or on the 800 East End. This is starting to collect junk and other things. It is long past time for the city to close this alley. Thank you, Judy Short.
Thank you. Okay, sir, you wanted to speak? So you go up to the microphone, state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Rusty Ballo. So the challenge with this alley is that it is blocked, and I live along the alleyway, and because of that, for a very long time, we've had substantial vagrant activity back there, lots of drug use. I've stepped on 2 needles back there. I've cleaned up multiple truckloads of trash. As a matter of fact, one time there was a pile of trash back there this big. I called Salt Lake City and said, can you come clean this up? And they said, well, we'll take a look at it. We'll get back to you. They called me back. They said, we can't get our equipment back there, so no. So I took 4 truckloads of trash to the dump. I've kicked multiple people out of back there using drugs and drinking, and what they've said to me, one clever gentleman said to me, he said, it's a public alley, you can't kick me out of here. And I was like, kind of got me there. Anyhow, The issue is that it either needs to be opened, so there's a line of sight, or closed up to a point where there is a line of sight down the alley. Because right now it goes into a big black hole. The weeds grow over. The pictures you're seeing are in wintertime. In the summer, it's completely grown over. You can't see down there. People make little shanties down there. The police never patrol it. I called the police once, one of the times when I stepped on a needle. And so I'm a full proponent of being closed, but it needs to be closed further up the alley than where it's being proposed, because you create this big, dark dead end. And I'm right at that dead end, and so that's where, sorry, I thought it was my phone. I'm right at that dead end where you do get, that's where people stop. And so I tried to get this thing closed in 2017, and the neighbors on Elm said, it's been tried to be done before, because of the utility situation, it won't work. So they wouldn't sign. I got everybody on Wilmington to sign the petition. And then I sent a letter met with Dan Ripp at the city and said, look, I'm going to give up on trying to close it because I can't get the Elm people to sign, so let's get it reopened. And then that didn't go anywhere either. And so the fence that's blocking is the neighbor to my east. He is under code enforcement, and so am I. So, because I've moved my fence back a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak on this item? Seeing no one, we've already taken care of those. I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission for discussion and a motion.
I want to note that the engineering department of Salt Lake City is always against alley vacations, including in this case. And I don't know whose job it would be to open the alley, to do all of this stuff that makes people move their fences and whatever. But when I was in the neighborhood, I felt like an open alley in that location seemed like a better idea to me than half-closed alley. I would be in favor of recommending that we don't vacate this alley, but then I don't know what steps they take to actually open it, to do all the stuff to open it.
Madam Chair, can Steph add something to that? Sure. So one of the problems with opening it is that it's only 7.3 feet wide, and that doesn't accommodate most cars. And so that is very difficult. It could be opened for pedestrian or bike use, but it would never really serve properly for vehicular.
What happened to the other 13 feet?
It just was never platted like that. It was platted with a 7.3.
As a skinny, like a pinch point?
No, well, what happened was there was a subdivision on one side and then individual lots on the other. And the way the surveys butted up,
yeah,
that it ended up only being 7.5 feet.
At that point, at the length,
on that end.
The length of his property, right. Beyond that, it is 13 feet, and that accommodates everything. But at this point, it does not.
Yeah.
So tried to keep that open.
I hear the problem, though, that it's like a dead end. When you're at the dead end of the alley, then that's where the problems happen. I'd like it to be an alley.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question of staff?
Sure.
I love mid-block walkways. They get me really, really excited. Is there some reason we didn't consider a mid-block walkway instead of vacating the alley in this case?
Well, we looked at that, and just the consideration that this has been most likely blocked or not necessarily, well, blocked and used as a driveway for probably 20 plus years. And it has not impacted anyone negatively. And there's 3 different routes that you can take to go west-east. I mean, there's Wilmington Avenue, Elm Avenue that connects from the businesses along 900 East, and then Commonwealth Avenue. And this is a short block. It's not a substantial block to where people are going, half a mile to get to somewhere where they can cross through. There's 3 ways that are very close together. So that was our consideration.
There's also, you have to note that the Sugar House line is just that has
Correct.
the pedestrian park It's just half a block away from this.
Exactly. So
So-
the S line does have a trail, a pedestrian trail along,
So it's
besides the
right
train
there.
line, right, exactly.
I think one of the main issue is the one that our person who spoke said, and I read his letter as well, and I'm sure all of us did it too, since it was in our package, is the fact that if I have no problem closing this alley, I have a problem closing it and creating another dead end where a more activity, trash can accumulate and not be really visible to, we haven't solved the problem by closing the alley. We haven't solved the problem of creating an attractive nuisance in that alley. So I'm open to any suggestions to do that. I don't have a problem closing the whole thing, but obviously that's not something that is on the table here tonight. I don't know if you just close it to this point, is there some way to maintain some kind of a visual presence through it? In other words, can if you use it as parking or whatever, do we have to allow people to build buildings on it, or can they not do that because of the utilities anyway? You understand what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, I mean, a structure can go over it. It would be at their cost to have, if the utility company or division or companies didn't have to come in and get to whatever's underneath their piping, or in this case, most likely it's just going to be overhead wiring, as you can see along it. But yes, from the east side, it cannot be closed. There's 3 properties that actually use this alley at that portion. But again, the width on the other side here, it's so small. I mean, it probably could be used again.
Well, I'm
for
not talking
walkability.
about that so much. I'm talking about trying to solve the problem, not being able to see into that dead end
Well,
from
and
anywhere, really.
Right, like
and
the-
having all those pretty much opaque fences along that alley too. So you're really inviting just all kinds of mischief in that area, trash, all kinds of stuff, and it becomes a purely unsafe thing.
Mhm.
I mean, it's already an unsafe thing, and we're not solving that problem by doing the alley vacation.
Well, I have a question about it, because I think what it solves is there's this kind of island of like a no man's land where there's a fence all the way around an empty lot. I think that's the issue, is people jump the fence, they create a little pocket in there. That pocket would go away, which would help get rid of some of that problem, which I think you'd still have a dead end, but it wouldn't be a dead end with a, piece of land in the middle of it for people to kind of hang out in. Yeah.
It's already, when you go and look at it, it's already being used as the intention is to use it. They're already parking cars on it. So if the ultimate intention is for it to be given to these property owners and then sold to this other property owner who it's adjacent to be used as a driveway, that's how it's being used right now.
Well, I'm just looking at this picture here on the top left that shows this little space where people can hang out. If
That doesn't go away with this alley vacation. It doesn't.
Is that
Sir.
So can we just vacate the entire alley?
Not on this application. This application is specific to the measurements that have been given to you.
Someone would have to apply to do it.
Yeah, it would have to be changed, or it would have to be a second application.
That's not part of this, though.
Can the planning commission apply to vacate the rest of the alley?
It is there and it would stay there.
No.
So I'm
Nice try.
generally not in favor of vacating alleys, mainly because when I purchased my home in not far from here, in how long ago? 98, and in 2007 I rebuilt my typical sugar house leaning car garage, and I activated the alley because I use my garage to face the alley, and that's how I get in and out. And if somebody had vacated it before me, I would never have had that opportunity. And 80% of my backyard would have ended up to be concrete. So I'm generally not in favor of these, but I like to take a look at them on individual bases. I will say that once I did that, and I use my garage every day, obviously, and I clean up my part of the alley. I actually clean up for the houses on the other side of me too. And the amount of trash in that, since it's been more active for me, has really gone down. And it's been a nice positive change for my section of the alley. But I see how this particular use is for these 4 lots, and that 7 feet, then you wouldn't be able by code to build a garage to then access via the alley, because the 7 feet wouldn't allow you to. The 13 feet would. But the 7 feet, your garage would have to be so far set back that it would be unrealistic to accomplish anything for future owners. So given that, I would be in support of this particular one, but like I wouldn't be in support of vacating the other rest of the alley. Because like these guys on Elm, some of them don't even have driveways, and you know, eventually future owners may want to do that and then increase their actual yard space. And then that has had a really positive effect on, you know, my experience with my alley. And I'm really glad that I was able to do that. So, but in this particular case, given those constraints and the width of how this was plotted out, I am definitely in support of a positive recommendation for this one.
So are you going to make a motion?
I can.
Thank you.
Moment, please.
We also recommend they remove the fence.
Not as part of this
It's
petition.
It's outside this petition.
Can I ask a quick question before we make a motion?
Sure.
I am confused. If this is city land, who put up the fence? The second fence.
Well, it
in
would have
green?
been illegally constructed.
It's
One of the
illegal.
owners?
No,
Probably
it would
not.
be-
A different
Probably
resident.
not.
And
So
it,
the city can just go and knock it down. It's city property. Why is the city allowing this to go on?
you probably didn't even know about it, and now maybe they do, and it would be a code issue.
There is, you own a fence though on this that blocks the alley, right?
Correct.
I mean, does the the petitioner or beneficiary, whatever,
Yes.
also has blocked off this alley?
Yeah,
Our
when I
house,
purchased the property in 1999,
But
There are a few
But they're under
No,
code. They're
that's-
under code enforcement
there
for
was
it.
a chain
because they
link
have
fence.
gravel parking lot and
Yeah.
parking in an
So they're
alley.
under a code enforcement for that blockage, and
Right.
I'm assuming that secondary fence that was illegally constructed may be under code enforcement too, but that's outside of
There-
this particular petition, so I see why we don't get an update on that one. But yeah, it was illegal. You can't do that, and the city would then do its proper issues within their
I think
enforcement.
my feeling is if you vacate this portion of the alley, you have a dead end there for the rest of forever. There will always be a dead end on this alley. No matter how many people put their garages off of it or whatever, there'll be a dead end. And I think that's what the problem is. I mean, it's strange to say that people blocking off or using this alley not as an alley hasn't caused any problems, because it sounds like it has caused problems to me. Anyway.
I definitely appreciate those sentiments. When I think about alley vacations, I guess I really think in terms of like future potential property owners and their options, and how alley vacations tend to completely eliminate those options. But I appreciate your sentiment on that. I am ready to make a motion.
Thank you, Commissioner
Okay.
Berry.
Based on the information presented and discussion, I move that the commission approve this application with the condition listed in the staff report.
I'll second that.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Berry and a second by Commissioner Christensen. Andreas, Commissioner Paredes,
I'll vote yes.
Commissioner Shearer,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Lee,
Yes.
Commissioner Gent,
Yes.
Commissioner Gale,
Yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira,
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
No.
Commissioner Berry,
Yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 yeses and 1 no. We're forwarding a positive recommendation. Thank you. Good luck. So I have this extra page here. Are you doing something?
So just to let
Okay.
you know, like, how this is. Oh, sorry.
There's
I unplugged it.
Planning Commission annual report. So hang in there a little bit longer. We're going to get a report on the stuff that's gone on. No, it's Planning Commission annual report. So we get we get Director Norris.
This will be quick.
I need to leave by 8:30, so.
Excuse me.
So we're required by policies.
On our next vacation,
Hey,
can we
hey.
go some better place better?
Let's take it down a little bit here.
I don't even know. All right. We're required by our policies and procedures to give the Planning Commission an annual report about the prior year's work, and so that's what we're doing tonight. This is actually posted on our website, so I'm just going to walk through some of the key points about it. Basically, we talk about what our division does, and so many of you may not know this, but we have 6 different planning teams in our office. One is the development review team. They're the people who are reviewing building permits and check zoning on those types of things. And then we have 4 planning teams that focus on different themes. So one is sustainability, one is equity, one is growth, and one is opportunity. And we also have our zoning administration team. They're the ones who interpret the code and tell the rest of us how to apply it. And you can see those staff members who lead each of those teams. We also have our administrative team. So they are the ones that you interact with the most, but they do a number of different things for us. Obviously, they support all of our public meetings. They maintain our website. They support commissions and our hearing officers. They also play a major role in the production of our documents that you see. We do have, for example, we have a graphic designer on our staff who helps us organize everything and make it as user-friendly and visually friendly as possible. They also help us with our budget and deal with all of our spending and our record management, which is one of the key functions that we do under Utah law. We have to save everything forever, so they help us do that. Our planning counter is our first point of contact. There are 3 planners who their primary duties are helping people who walk in, submit applications. They do zoning reviews for business licenses, and they help us process land use applications. Some of the work they've done over the last year. So we had 1,070 land use applications submitted in 2022. The planning counter touches every single one of those in some way. So they're making sure all the submittal requirements are included. They have their own kind of email address for general inquiries. They answered over 1,800 emails to that, in addition to emails that they get at their personal email address. The planning counter took in over 5,000 phone calls and replied to every single one of those over the year. They reviewed over 2,000 business licenses, and they processed 635 over-the-counter approvals. So these are the types of things that we can do administratively that commissions never see. It's a very significant amount of our work. The development review planners, like I said, these are the people who review building permits to make sure all the zoning rules are complied with, and that plans that are submitted for building permit comply with Planning Commission, Landmarks Commission approvals. So they did over 3,100 zoning reviews on building permits last year. A lot of those are minor things where they don't need to look at a full site plan, but about 2/3 of those were things where they have to check everything from parking to signs to landscaping to building height to setbacks and uses and everything else. So we consider those full zoning reviews. Because we have a fairly complex and lengthy code, there is a lot of staff time spent reviewing all of those, and that's one of the reasons why we bring code amendments forward to streamline things and remove outdated provisions that really are not necessary to achieve city goals anymore. They also meet with in what's called development review meetings. These are kind of pre-application meetings where people have questions. They're staffed not only by people in the planning division, but also building, fire, engineering, transportation, and public utilities. Sometimes urban forestry if there's a proposal that deals with street trees. We organize and staff and lead those. So last year we participated in 309 of those. Those are regularly scheduled types of meetings. I already talked about the number of land use applications that we received. So these are broken down into 5 categories. They're the appeals, Historic Landmarks Commission, Planning Commission, subdivisions, and then zoning administration. So there's different types of applications in each one of those. Last year we had the lowest number of appeals that we have ever had filed. So we had, I think, someplace it's in here, a total of 4. We average about 15 per year. A lot of that is because of the work that our staff is doing and ensuring that decisions are based on standards and there's rationale for each of those. We have a lot of people who ask us about appealing. Once we talk to them and explain what they have to prove and demonstrate, most of them decide not to move forward with it. So 3 of those appeals were of administrative decisions. One was of a Landmarks Commission. The HLC decision was upheld because of the good work that staff and the Landmarks Commission did to document their findings. And then we've had the other 3 appeals. One was relocated billboard, which make up a significant number of the appeals we get. And then a couple of enforcements, one related to, both of these are on, well, the artificial turf, they withdrew. It's not allowed in park strips. And there's been several appeals that have been decided on that. And so once they realized that, they withdrew that. And then we have a pending one about the legality of an off-site parking lot. The Landmarks Commission, they do a lot of work, but not as much as the Planning Commission sees. Most of these are approved at the staff level. So you can see the things that go to the Landmarks Commission are new construction and some major alterations, and they weigh in, and demolitions. They weigh in, or demolitions of contributing buildings or landmark buildings. And then they weigh in on things like designations. We've had 3 of those applications submitted last year. The bulk of this work are minor alterations. That's where people are doing something like repairing a railing on a historic home or a soffit or windows, or looking to replace those things, or building a fence. Basically any exterior alteration to a property in a historic district has to have a certificate of appropriateness, and most of those are approved by our staff at the planning counter as people walk in. Getting to there are some stats in this, and we'll share this link if you guys want to do it, about the number of items that they received, but we wanted to focus mostly on the work that you guys do. So the Planning Commission last year reviewed 178, or there were 178 Planning Commission applications submitted, and there were a total of 119 that made it onto Planning Commission agendas. That is down a little bit from our average, but keep in mind that is primarily because we removed the special exception process, which accounted for most of that difference. We did see a drop off in number of applications in the second half of the calendar year compared to the first half, which we could all expect as economic conditions were changing. But this summarizes the number of applications we've received based on the type. They're pretty comparable to past years. The one that is down the most is the conditional uses. So we typically are averaging between 45 and 50. And so those are down, 15 or 20%. But the rest of them are pretty similar in numbers to what we get on a typical year, at least the last 3 years that have been high production years. One of the things I really wanted to touch on is one of the things that happened due to the pandemic is that we went to digital open houses where we are posting everything online, producing the same things that we would produce if we were holding an in-person open house. When we do in-person, we would get a handful of people at any one of those. And so, throughout the year, based on those number of applications, we see about 200 to 300 people total on an annual basis. Last year, more than 10,000 people viewed the open house materials online. So we're getting a far more reach. This doesn't include those things that go to community councils. These are those things that would otherwise be at an open house. So it gives you a pretty good idea of the digital reach is far greater than mailing out a notice to people and asking them to come to some location somewhere in the city to learn about something. The Planning Commission agendas, so that page was viewed over 10,000 times. The 119 different staff reports that were posted online were viewed about a total of 2,000. And then on our YouTube channel online, those meetings were viewed more than 5,000 times. So there's actually a lot of people who are paying attention to what the Planning Commission does, way more than we think based on the people who may come to meetings. We did also include a number of accomplishments. So last year, through the Planning Division, a lot of this was through the Planning Commission as well, but there are some things that were approved at the staff level. We entitled 4,821 housing units last calendar year, so that's the second highest annual number that we have. 2021 was the highest when we had 6,251. Obviously, not all of those will make it to be completed, but it gives you a reflection of how many that we have seen. So one of the interesting things about this was in 2017, 18, and 19 combined, we had about 3,100. So last year, or 2021, we doubled the previous 3 years, and this last year we increased that by almost 50%. So quite a bit. The other thing is that amounts to almost a 5% increase in the total housing supply in the city if all those were to be built. So that's a pretty significant number in 1 year. We worked on a number of sustainability initiatives over the years. Some of these were recent for you, so updating landscaping regulations so that our residents are eligible for state and other rebates to remove sod and use more water-wise landscaping. And then the council we transmitted the Urban Forest Action Plan, which provides direction and guides the future of our urban forest. That plan's anticipated to be adopted shortly by the City Council. We worked also on a number of equity initiatives. Some of these you'll know, and some of these will be coming up. The Downtown Building Heights and Street Activation Project, Homeless Resource Center text amendments, which the City Council will be hearing in over the next 30 days to start that. And then the Thriving in Place, which is going to lead to a number of zoning amendments that you will see in the next several months. Those primarily deal with that the Planning Commission will see immediately will be defining what our general plan is for the city. So all of those community plans added together, adding factors that consider displacement in those decisions, and also adding a requirement for some community benefit in both zoning and amendments to the general plan. So some big pieces there. Various growth initiatives. The Ballpark Station Area Plan, which under state law we're required to certify all of our station area plans. We have to have 4 of them done by 2025. Fortunately, we have plans for most of our stations already, and so it's a process of getting those certified through the Wasatch Front Regional Council. The Ballpark Station Area Plan, which was adopted in October, was certified 2 weeks ago, and we are starting the process for the for a stationary plan around the 2100 South station. Even though half of that land's not in Salt Lake City, we still need to do one, and then we'll be submitting based on finalization of some state code changes. We'll be submitting certifications for all of our other stations along 400 South through downtown and North Temple, and seeking exceptions to doing stationary plans at the airport and on the campus of the University of Utah, because we don't have land use authority up there. The ADU code amendments, and also we transmitted the North Point Small Area Plan, the opportunity initiatives that have been or to the Planning Commission or were adopted this year. So the affordable housing incentives, I'm gonna give you a heads up to start preparing yourself for that coming back. Could be probably that first meeting in March. We're going to have several briefings with the Planning Commission on some changes. We met with a focus group for a couple of months to address some of the issues, to iron some things out. We had people run some pro formas on the incentives to make sure they work, and to analyze the affordability level. We're working on the enforcement piece of that right now with the Attorney's Office, Police Department, and we've gotten some guidance from other cities who have similar types of things in place. So there's going to be a lot of that, but it's a pretty significant piece of code change that I think both the mayor and city council want to see happen in some form. And then the council finally adopted 3 pretty significant code amendments. One are updated parking regulations, which when they adopted that, they gave people 4 months to use either code. You couldn't pick and choose between the code. You could either pick to follow this one, the old one, or the new one. That 4-month period expires on February 18th, and so we'll be operating fully under the new updated parking regulations. Then at that point, and just as a reminder, that divided the city up into different parking contexts based on transit access, proximity and location to business districts, and the city's cycling network. Shared housing, which was expanded to other parts of the city, and then the RMF 30 update. We actually, the RMF 30 doesn't go into effect until April, but we already have people who are looking at rezoning their properties from one of the other RMF zones to RMF 30 because it works better for them. So I think that's a sign that those changes that we were looking at are working. And that was the end of the report. Happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Nick, I'm sorry. Is this project, is this available to us?
It is. I will email a link. It's on the planning homepage.
Okay.
So Nick, I had a couple of questions. What was the update on the, you got a grant to do the planning for around 3rd West and the 2100 South. How's that going?
So we're waiting for, so we have a consultant on board that's a land use transportation grant that was from the Wasatch Front Regional Council. So they handle the contract piece of that. We have to agree to the terms of those contracts. That contract is waiting for signature from the mayor right now, but we have a selected consultant, and once that is signed, then we're going to be ready to start. Hopefully that's any day.
Okay. And then I seem to remember maybe a couple of years ago, but time gets away from you. You had on staff somebody who was working on a plan for like landscaping and like placemaking type. She came and gave us an update of the things she wanted to be working on, which was kind of incorporating public art, but it was also getting some of these other goals with landscaping and whatnot. Whatever happened with that?
So that was our former urban designer who has left the city, and she's now has a similar role, I think, in Charlotte. But we're still working on that. So one of the things that we're doing, which the mayor actually just signed today, as a matter of fact, is updating our landscaping code to, instead of focusing on maybe landscaping that was more suburban in nature. I don't know the right way to say that, but is definitely focused more on water conservation, managing storm drainage, and reducing the heat island effect.
So I remember some of the comments that I made, and that was also in relationship to like parking and parking lots not being asphalt, but being, you know, some impervious surfaces. And so I just wanted to follow up and see if that extending that landscaping to that.
All of that is in that
Okay.
that proposal. We have that drafted already. It's just a
Okay.
matter of the mayor saying, "Yep, go start." The
Yeah,
public
because
process.
whenever we see big asphalt things, I'm like, we could do better than that. And then finally, so that Andrew can pipe in, when you have the big plans, the general plans in that, can we get like a pre-working session or a pre-briefing so we have a little bit more time to digest all of it?
Yeah, we're actually working on a more of a consistent process from the point of when we start reviewing, or at least updating the commission on what the scope of the project is, so that you know from the beginning what is going to be looked at, and intermittent updates on that process so that you're not getting it all at once.
That would be really nice. And then when you bring the homeless issue back to us, make sure that we have cookies.
Make sure you have what?
Cookies. Lots of cookies for that one. Thanks.
Quick question, since it's come up twice, I think, the artificial turf. So I was in Washington recently, and there were brand new developments with AstroTurf. Didn't bother me. It seemed fine. Why do we not allow it?
So right now we don't allow it in our code. Basically, it's very prescriptive about what it does allow. And so artificial turf is one of those things that we don't allow. We are unlikely to allow it in the park strips, primarily because one of the things that we're finding is that the submaterial, which oftentimes are these rubber pellets, end up in our storm drain and end up in our waterways, and that's not good. And so that's why we're going to be fine with it on private property, but at least where it's the highest likelihood to get into our storm drains at our park strips, that would be a reason why.
Anything else for Nick?
I don't have anything for Nick, but I do have one question before we adjourn, just
Okay.
so everyone doesn't get it.
Okay. Go ahead.
Well,
I guess I'm done.
Thank you, Nick.
No, so I just wanted to raise something that I think might be worth considering at some point. Our last meeting, we approved subdividing a duplex into a townhouse situation, which is going to result in 2 owners being members of an HOA, which in my experience, there's no good that's going to come of that. And so I wonder if, I get that it was all consistent with standards and with the current ordinances, but I just wanted to raise it as something that maybe we look at, because I think it's a great way to get, it meets all those goals of home ownership and some of those other things, but having one home that has been a duplex with 1 garage, 1 carport on a common property, allowing the subdivision basically of that house into 2 separate lots, and then requiring 2 people to agree on a association of some organization that's going to control how that surrounding property is used, who pays for it. It's just like a nightmare down the road. It's each of the owners placing a lien on the other person's house, making it difficult for them to sell. So just in my experience, it might be worth looking at some point to think, yes, we want all of these things are good, that approval would lead to, that there's more ownership of homes and not as much rental or that sort of thing. But I think we also have to look at the other side of what that kind of approval could lead to, which is potentially not good. I guess that's a lawyer's job, is to be like, not good stuff. But I just raise it as something to look at.
Okay. Well,
yeah,
keep it in the pot. See what happens. They may come back to us because they're going to do something else.
Well, I don't mean just specifically to that situation. Like that's done and over with. I mean generally, in terms of what our ordinances say and what our planning requirements are. We may want to look at what would allow that and think about if we want to have something, at least,
Okay, I think
situations where
that's your job to find that
I think that's why it comes
spot.
before us, so that we can be the body that makes that decision.
Yeah, there's also a requirement for any plan development that has any sort of shared space. They have to provide and disclose, like they have to come up with a 50-year maintenance plan, declaration, whatever, of how that's going to happen.
Right.
And so that's something that isn't necessarily reviewed by the planning commission
Right.
because they just have to do it and record it when they get ready to do that. So that's been how we have addressed, at least let people know that from when they purchase a property like that, that's a reality. Obviously, that doesn't eliminate those issues where they may disagree on something, but, and that, I don't know that absent of prohibiting those kinds of things, I don't know that there's really a role for the city to deal with that other than to do what we can to tie it to those titles so that people know what's expected and how to deal with it. Yeah.
The problem is having just two people.
Oh yeah, it's
Right?
yeah. When
It's
you have
gonna
small,
result
it's
in
hard.
deadlock.
Yeah.
All right, anybody have anything else? Andreas needs to be out by 8 o'clock. So I'm going to close this meeting of the Planning Commission. We're adjourned.